UI UX, but also integrating really strong innovation and design process into an organization that maybe isn't so used to that kind of process. And so they're going to talk to you about that experience and what their work is like and some lessons learned, and then we'll stick around afterwards for portfolio reviews, which I think will be incredibly valuable. So I will let them take away.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. So just like a quick introduction, my name is Joan Kurlak. I'm a design researcher at Lutron. I've been at Lutron for about 8 years, and I actually started in marketing. That's kind of how my whole journey began. And for the last 2 years now, I've been working on the UX team at Lutron in this design researcher role. So I've learned so much new process, and like Sarah said, we've really been working to implement good design processes and design thinking at Lutron. And so then we have Samesh here.
Yeah, like so I also I'll work along with Joan, like on the UX team. I'm also a design researcher. My path was a little bit more conventional. Like I got hired into Lutron as an interaction designer first. And then I started doing a little bit of research, got more interested into it, and then finally now I'm focusing more on just research and early solutioning, and working closely with interaction designers and visual designers and other parts of the organization to implement those ideas that come out of the research. I didn't have a marketing background. My background was in CS, and then I did a master's in human-computer interaction from Michigan.
And then in this room, from what I've heard from Sarah, is you guys have a lot of different backgrounds kind of coming in. So where are you guys? Is everybody who's coming from engineering kind of side? So how about business or marketing or anything like that? What else? What other kinds of backgrounds are you guys coming from? Design.
Yeah. Nice.
Oh yeah, design. Cool.
Yeah.
So that's so awesome. I think that's what makes this type of work really fun too, is because we have so many different types of ways of thinking and types of people that come together to do it. And we see.
And I think one tidbit and advice, whichever companies you guys are joining, I think it would be a good question to ask, what is the disciplinary, what are the different disciplines the team is made of? Because what we have felt is a really good multidisciplinary team adds so much more to the process than everyone coming from the same discipline. So that's something to keep in mind.
So that's who we are. And so our plan for today is basically we're going to just spend a tiny bit of time telling you who Lutron is, because a lot of people haven't heard of us. We're a really big company, but we're not yet necessarily a name that just the average person's oh yeah, Lutron. And we thought we'd tell you a little bit about our workspace and team, but most of the time we want to spend today is on sort of real project examples and learnings as we've been applying this process at Lutron and working through some projects in our company. So this was actually, so when people ask who's Lutron, I like to say our founder actually invented the dimmer, so the light dimmer. This was a very early ad of ours, so you can see it was all about romance and setting the mood and things like that. And now we've grown into this big worldwide company. We're now the leader in lighting controls and automated shades. So in addition to the controlling lights, we also make motorized window treatments, so they can not only control the light from the artificial lights in the space, but the amount of light coming into the space. So it's all about light. And we have over 4,000 patents. Sanjeev told me to say that ask legal, but I think it might be more like 5,000 now. And
This
then
data was 2 years back.
yeah, and you'll see we've always been a really design-driven tech company. Some of our products, a lot of our products, in terms of the keypads and the things that you would interact with, we say that they're designed from the outside in. So there's a big focus on how do they look, how are people gonna interact with them, what are they gonna feel like, and then we try to make sure that the technology inside that can work with them and support that. And then obviously today it's a really exciting place to be because of the whole IoT space. So now we have these really cool products in the physical space of the home that are, we've got apps and all that kind of stuff that they can be controlled with. So, and we're a global company where it's funny, we're actually still privately held, so they don't publish how many people work at Lutron. They're weird about it, but these are all where we have offices. Our global headquarters is in the Lehigh Valley, which is about an hour north of the city. we also just opened an office a couple years ago in the FMC Tower here in Philly, so just a few all around. So just like a little history of some of the innovations. So this was that first product, that rotary dimmer that got brought to market in 1963. And just like an early cool user experience story is that rather than using just standard cardboard box kind of packaging for the controls, our founder chose to use perfume boxes. So he bought a bunch of boxes from a perfume box company and used them to package our products. So he wanted them to stand out on the shelf and just kind of be portrayed as a higher quality product. So I love that story from like way back when. And then this, I was so excited when I walked in here today and saw this.
Yeah.
This is one of our, so this is actually from 1971, as you can see. So the design.
It's still working.
What's that?
It's still working.
Still working, yeah. Might not be the best looking, no, but and what's really cool is actually that it's part of the permanent collection at the MoMA. That's kind of the idea of designing from the outside in. Like, how does it look? Dimmers didn't look like that, I guess, back in the day in controls. So, and then another fun thing. So in 1990, we actually introduced the first whole home lighting control system. So now everybody talks about smart home. It's a big thing, but we've been doing it for almost 30 years, which is really, so thinking about like how a lot of times we've been really early innovators in spaces like this. And then kind of catching up to today, this is one of our systems now called Caseta that launched in 2014. You can control your lights, shades, and temperature from anywhere. And this is the app for that. And this is actually where our team really started to get formed, because we had to start designing apps and user experiences and interactions, and that wasn't something that we ever had to do as a company before. So that was kind of the birth of our team. We've grown beyond that now, just doing the interaction design, but this is kind of a fun start for us. And actually, one of the early members of our team, as part of the Apple Watch launch, she went out to Cupertino in the months leading up to the watch with another product manager of ours, and they designed one of the first Apple Watch apps. And it was, our app was featured as part of the whole Apple Watch launch. I think there were only like 8.
Yeah,
or so.
like 8 or so apps, and then like even within the company it was very secret. Like we didn't know like where she went, you know, like so 2 months like okay, like where is she? Like I don't know.
So, what happened to Erica?
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just some of the some things about Neutron. This is our headquarters up in the Lehigh Valley. There's a few buildings on campus. You can see another one over here. Our team sits in this building on this floor. We have a corner space. I think that's nice. Yeah, so we have one of those corners. We have a studio. It's actually looking very clean and organized in this picture. But we always have lots of like whiteboards. We have a bunch of different walls all around that we can use. We do a lot of affinity mapping and a lot of meetings here. A lot of like TV spaces and stuff. So that's our spot. This is some of us in the studio earlier this week. This is the team, not everybody, but there's about a dozen of us on the team now. You can see Kimmy. She was in the Philly office that day, so she works out of there primarily. But we use a lot of Teams meetings, and we're growing. That's Sanjeev, who's the head of our team. So now just kind of like switching over. That was just a little bit so you know like where we're coming from, who the heck we are. But we wanted to talk more about some like real project examples and learnings. Before we go into that, this is a 30,000 foot view of the process that we follow, and it should look pretty familiar. It's the design thinking process. We're going to focus mostly today on this like design research section, so kind of going through the whole research and synthesis process, and then moving into the solution space where we ideate and validate. That's mostly where Samesh and I play. But then we also have interaction designers and visual designers on our team. So what typically happens is once we come out of our design research process, if it's software related and it's something that we would actually make an app or a new software tool, our team will carry it on. We have those designers who come into play, so they'll detail the interactions, test it, and work with visual design. But if it's a new product or if it's marketing or a new service kind of thing that comes out of our process, we would still stay somewhat involved, but act more as a consultant than as it goes into like engineering or marketing or.
Yeah, so like the last two diamonds were where like we were, like mostly in the year 2014, and since then, like what we have done is like we have gotten more and more upstream, where like earlier that work was mostly done by the product managers, and the sales team, doing it together. And obviously, there was less of a process at that time, and since then, like we have created the process of upstream, like we have added tools and methodologies, UX methodologies that work there. And only recently we have started working on, bigger business problems, challenges, and on creating the roadmaps of like what the future of the products are going to look like, down the line. So more and more, it has been about, how the UX and the product and the business can work together to make something that is actually desired by the users.
So these are some of the stories that we wanted to walk through. So kind of like when we're at the very beginning of one of these projects, how we've had to a lot of times reframe the problem that we get, because sometimes it's a very, prescriptive way of thinking that we get, and we've learned to kind of work through that to come up with better questions to be asking. And then kind of some examples from synthesis. There's a project actually that Sarah's been working with us a bit on. We were struggling with how to synthesize some of our information. We're like, should we use archetypes, personas, and we ended up using both. And we can talk about why. And then kind of when we get to the end of this first diamond, how have we worked to figure out what are the right problems to solve? This is something I feel like as I was moving into this type of a role, I felt like there was a lot of training about how to do research and then synthesis, and then it just jumped right to ideation and testing and stuff, and it's kind of like, okay, well, we had some really, how do you make that jump? So we'll talk about how we've done that. And then Symmetra's going to talk a bit too about how we use the Wizard of Oz technique in a recent project.
So these are like 4 that we feel like are a little different than what you might have read in general about in the industry, like about the UX methods and tools. Other than that, like we have like tons of like standard UX methods and tools like observations, interviews, journey maps and all of those things. But we felt like highlighting these four and talking about them would be more important to you guys, rather than talking about like all the sets of tools and methods that we have.
Cool. All right, so we'll talk about framing, reframing problems first.
So we, like at UTron, we call it like framing, reframing problems. But recently I was reading a book by Professor Tina Seelig, and she is the director of innovation at Stanford. And she uses this term, brainstorming, and I really like that term, and that's why I put it here. One phrase that she calls is like brainstorming before brainstorming. And what that means is, it's really essential to first rethink about like what problem you're trying to solve. Like what we have felt inherently is like people are comfortable with execution, like even our product managers or like engineers or like you talk to those people and they want something to execute, but they're really uncomfortable when it comes to confronting the unknowns. Like they don't want to confront it, they don't want be involved in that process. So that ultimately falls on the UX team. So asking questions like are we chopping down the right tree, before doing anything else? Or even a more basic and primary question, are we even in the right jungle to begin with? So nobody asks these questions, and if we don't ask these questions, what we have felt is like oftentimes we come up with solutions that are subpar and that do not meet the needs of either the users or the organization at large. So what we have done is we have developed 3 lenses how we can reframe problems or do the brainstorming. And those 3 lenses are the first is 5 whys, the second is question the question, and the third is challenging the assumptions. You can apply 1 or 2 of these lenses on a problem to reframe it. What we have found is if you apply a combination of these lenses, or even better, if you apply all the 3 lenses to reframe the problem, then you get a problem that is worth solving, that provides enough solution space where innovative ideas can come and be kindled. So one more second. Sorry.
I thought you were saying that.
So 5 whys, just to give a brief overview of what each of these is. So 5 whys is a technique that is used to basically get to the root cause of the problem. So one of the questions when I was like your age, like one of the questions I had in my mind was, I'm doing this HCI program, like will I get the right job or not? Like or will I get a good job like after this program? So if you do the 5 why analysis on that, like is like, okay, like why do you think like you won't get a good job? It's like, because like, one of the answers might be, I don't know like if my portfolio is like worth showing or like is a good portfolio that companies will even, like pay attention to. So okay, why do I think that? Because like I haven't shown it to someone like and have gotten like good, critique or feedback on it. And why I haven't done that? Like one of the reasons might be that because I have like enough classes this semester that I cannot focus on that portfolio. And answering the question, I don't think so I will get a good job versus like I don't have enough, like bandwidth to work on my portfolio. The solutions will be entirely different, right? Like so, working on the right problem is very essential to come to the right solution. Similarly, like the question is basically it helps you think about the premise of the question. For example, if you give someone, like the question about, okay, today is Dan's birthday, how might we celebrate it? That question inherently has like an answer to it. So celebration means like you will have a party or you will do something, that involves a party. Whereas like if you question it and you put it differently, you can ask like, okay, how might we make Dan's day memorable? And that opens the solution space like tremendously, so now you're not bounded by just like a party ideas, but like giving them something or like, taking them through an experience that, is very intimate to them. Similarly, like challenging the assumptions is about, a lot of times when a problem comes to you, like there are a bunch of assumptions and truths that, are bundled into it that you believe are to be the truth. Like a very good example of that was like in the 1980s, the circus industry was going down, and like Cirque du Soleil, like the people behind it, they challenged that that the beliefs held about circus, like during the 1980s, which was like circus are supposed to be cheap and they are supposed to be for kids. So they challenged both of those assumptions, saying that okay, like what if like we make circus that are not for kids and for adults, and what if they're not cheap, but like something that like is a luxury to go to. And with that in mind, like they come up with the concept of Cirque du Soleil, and it's still going strong. Like it has been like almost like 30 years now since they launched it, and it's still going strong. So it's really important, like to write down all of those assumptions that come along with the problem, and like ask questions, like okay, like what if we do this differently or not? Okay, so just to bring it all back to one of the projects that we are working on, one of the initial prompts that we got from the business was how can we support users to get a dollar quote or estimate like after they have done detailed design on a project. And so like a lot of our work is like B2B. So this was about like a lot of contractors, like a lot of our audiences are like contractors and distributors, and what they have to do is like they have to, based on the project requirements, they have to put together a design of like how different Neutron products are going to work together in order to meet the project requirements. So what they were able to do with Neutron products was like be able to do project design, but what they were not able to do was like come up with a quote, like or what the final price of that design is going to be. So we worked on this initial prompt, and the final prompt that we came up with was like how might we double the sales of one of our product lines by creating users who do not need additional support from our sales team, and we call those users farmers. So you see like how different like it got changed into like from the initial prompt to the final prompt. And I'll take you to the journey of like how it happened. So first what we did was like we applied the 5 why technique, like and said like okay, like, how can we support users to get to a dollar estimate? Why do we want to do that? And the first answer we got was like like so that users have a path to move forward and they're not stuck with like just the design phase without having like any like estimate to what the design is going to cost. We said okay, why do we want to do that? Because like right now if they're stuck at any phase, they might look at competitors and like try to get like estimates from them. Okay, and then why do we want to do that? Like, and then finally it boiled down to like like at the end of the day we have to grow our business, like, and we cannot like just let our sales go to our competitors. So that was looking at the problem through the lenses of like 5 whys. Next we said like okay, like let's rethink the question. So we started like asking questions, like from this question that okay, like why do users even want to? Why do we want to support the users to create a code? Like why can't they do it like themselves? Or like even before that, we you talked about like detail design, you know, like why do users do detail design on their own? You know, like why can't that, you know, be done by us or like someone else? And then we also ask like why do users do, what do users do before doing a detail design? You know, what the entirety of the process is, like it can influence any other part of the process, like before influencing the estimating part of the process or the coding part of the process. And we had like a list of like 10 to 15 questions. And we first like try to get answers to those questions before even working on the prompt that we got from the business. And the last lens that we looked at from was like challenging the assumptions. So what we started doing was like we started writing like the list of assumptions that Lutron's business and sales team had today, which was like, you know, like Lutron's sales team has to help or handle the customers to the next phase. You know, like that was an assumption that you hear. Everybody in the industry is doing it. If we don't do it, like we'll fail. The second assumption was like we have to create a code using phone or email or other manual intervention. So like today, like people feel that it's easier like if somebody picks the phone directly and like call someone or like send you know scan something and send it over an email. People find that easy versus like you know like working it out like on any digital tool or like a physical tool or something like that. So we wrote that as an assumption, and or like the next assumption was like if we give customers time between designing code, like they will go to our competitors. Like why is that true? You know like. So we wrote that as an assumption as well. And like similar, again, like we had like a list of assumptions. And then we started like asking like what if questions on these assumptions. So if you look at the final prompt, like the first part of the prompt was influenced heavily by the 5 whys. So that's why like we put like, you know, like, okay, we want to grow the sales of our business. And we put a number to it just so that we can quantify and also show like, you know, that we are succeeding. We are able to succeed or not. So we said like, okay, like double the sales. And then like the last part, which was like with how giving them additional support from our sales team, that was influenced by the other two lenses, which was like question to question and writing assumptions. So with this tool, with this like prompt, like we were able to actually create like a tool which is like similar to TurboTax, and it's like very easy to use. Like you just give us your project information, and you know like at the end of the day you will be able to, and as you're giving project information, it shows you know like similar to TurboTax like how much estimate the new estimate is, and you keep refining your estimate, keep refining your project details, and you will get like a better and better estimate. So now it's like totally off of Lutron sales team. It's like totally you know like DIY tool. And what feedback we are getting from the people is like that it's like changing the way that estimate and like coding was done.
You're gonna hear more about that when Sumesh talks about the Wizard of Oz.
So yeah, like so I'm going to take that project like and going to like show you like how we implemented like other UX techniques on it. This is what
we'll take a quick break and talk about another recent project that we worked on, and we were kind of struggling with how to do some synthesis. So this project was all about, and this is still ongoing. We got the challenge of we wanted to just grow a specific business area by 3 to 5x. So this is where it's really exciting because our team went from, hey, we need a new app, can you design it, to like, we want to totally innovate and change the game and grow our business exponentially. Can you guys help us figure this out? So this was a really exciting project to be involved in, and it's still ongoing right now. And so we had gone through, we did all the research this past summer, we did a bunch of in-home interviews, moved through affinity nodes, made crazy affinity walls in our studio, and had done all of this synthesis. We did journey maps, a couple different versions of journey maps. We had even applied like the jobs to be done framework and really explored that. But we were still missing, we wanted to, we kind of just assumed that we'd make some personas because that's a tool that we've used a lot in the past. And you know, we needed to apply figure out a way to capture what we learned about behaviors, attitudes, motivations, and there were just some really awesome stories that we had heard from people in our interviews that we felt were really important to convey to the rest of our team so that they could really empathize. And so, anyway, we started off with personas, and unfortunately I can't show any of the details because this project's still really confidential. But this was one persona we made about a guy, Steve, who was really into energy optimization in his home. But what we were finding, we went through this whole process to try to create the personas where we listed out a bunch of characteristics that we saw and plotted each user on a scale to see where they fell, and we looked for patterns, see who was clustering together. We definitely found some strong clusters, but what happened is we're like, well, none of the demographics are lining up about these how are we going to make a persona, and, you know, if the one really great example that we heard was about, you know, this woman who lives in her beach house half the time, her house in Philly the other half of the time, like, are people going to get really caught up in the fact that this is like a vacation home versus the permanent home or whatever? So we really didn't want to restrict people's thinking so much and like narrow it in. So what we tried then is we made some archetypes. So rather than like Steve, we just made the energy optimizer, and we looked at what were their primary jobs to be done, because that was always consistent. What was their most important product criteria when they were searching for our product? What were we competing against? Literally, sometimes we were just competing against trees outside for window shades because they provide natural shade. Whereas for other people, we were competing against a manual shade or something else. But like, depending on sometimes on people's jobs to be done, we had very different things we were competing against. Different people, different groups had some similar frustrations, and then ultimately we looked at why did they choose our solution in the end. But so this was really helpful in terms of thinking more broadly about different user types and archetypes, but we kind of lost the ability to empathize. So when we moved throughout our whole process, and then we go from the team that was really closely involved in research to working with our engineers, or even more people on our team who maybe hadn't been involved in the process, you kind of lose a lot of that richness. And we also lost the ability to tell those stories that we heard, like about how this one guy always wanted to leave the windows open a little bit so that his cat could hang out in the warmth of the sun. And we heard a lot of cool things like that. So what we ended up doing is just we made both, and for each type of person that we saw. So what we did is we started with archetypes, and we would introduce an archetype and talk about them. But then we created an illustrative persona for each archetype just to help make it real and help people really empathize. So this was really helpful when we were in ideation sessions, especially with people who had kind of come along for the research process, maybe been in an interview or two, or a little bit closer to the project, or even a lot of the product managers and people that we have internally have been out with a lot of customers in the past, so they're able to kind of naturally fill in some of these gaps. But then we know now as we move farther along and start to bring in more people, now we're actually shifting into this, like, you know, the solution space, and there's going to be a lot more people coming in. It'll be really helpful to be able to illustrate a lot more in a more empathetic way.
Yeah, I think like, just to add to it, like, I think personas like have more constraints than an archetype. Like, and I think personas are really good tools to validate solutions, because then you can like look at those stories and see, you know, like see like that whether the solution will be able to connect with these people like at an emotional level or not, which is like very essential for the success of the product. Whereas like if you put those constraints very early on in the ideation phases, then people are like thinking about like a very limited set of ideas, you know, that okay, like to satisfy this story, let's come up with this idea. So to broaden the you know, like again the horizon of the solution space, like we felt like archetypes work really better where you give them like you know, like some guide rails, but don't block them too much into thinking that okay, yeah, this is the right solution. And then eventually, like I think like we will use persona. Also, like as Joan said, like when you're talking with engineering, again, I don't want to say that in a bad way, but like engineers have like a very narrow focus of like how to solve a problem. They're always like about that, you know, like so. What we have felt is like people who are really good at developing code and things like that are very uncomfortable with like if you don't give them the details, because their minds always goes towards the edge cases. Like okay, like how can I do that? Again, those are the really good engineers, you know, who can think of those edge cases. So introducing them with an archetype is like really challenging, because then they think like, oh, it's superfluous, like there are no details, like it doesn't mean anything. So when you are working with the engineers and you want something to be developed, like persona is always a better way, because then they can, you know, like think of all those edge cases and think of like, you know, whether, you know, this person will be using the features that they will be developing or not. So internally what we have seen, like not just in this project, but engineers then like at some point internalize these personas, and then they're talking, you know, like by taking name, and that's when you realize that okay, like the personas have been successful, you know, like the ones that you created.
And yeah, and a lot of times too, not that this is right or wrong, but our engineers just haven't been out in the field as much as other folks in the business have. So like if we show this to one of our product managers, she'll be like, oh yeah, that's like Marvin. Or
yeah,
like it's just she gets like this kind of person, whereas our engineers maybe haven't met as many of our customers or been into homes with people, and so they have a harder time, they need that illustration, so. All right, handing it back over to you, so kind of how we now go through all this research and pick the right problems to solve.
Before we move forward, like, do you guys have any questions so far, like for those two techniques that we talked
Yeah.
about? You'll have time at the end also, or while you're doing your portfolio, you'll say like, did you actually reframe the columns or not? But yeah, like, okay, so if not, like, then we'll just move forward, keep going. So I think like Joe touched on it, right? Like the typical process that we follow is like, like you go out, talk to these people, observe them, and you have like your raw notes, and from those raw notes you have like a list of like insights, and then you apply like different models or journey maps and like other types of maps, like on those insights, and take into account like all the feedback and comments that you're getting from the stakeholders to come up with like a short list of like top insights. That these are the things that we believe like are the key things that we've gotten from this research. When we showed like top insights to our stakeholders, a lot of times like people have this question in their head that like, yeah, these are really good, but we cannot act on all of them at the same time, because like there is never like an abundance of like resources at a company, like, which is a hard reality. So there's always like this trade-off, like okay, like of these things, like which are the ones that we should really pursue. And that was like a point of confusion for everyone, because people had like different relative like like importance of insights in their heads, and everybody felt like something different was like more important than the other thing. So we went through this like uncertainty phase like in several projects, and at the end of the day, like we said like, okay, there are two primary criteria that are most important. Like one is like how much like if we solve this insight, or like if we work on this insight, how much value it's going to provide to our end customer, and then how much value it's going to provide for the company. Like I think like if those two align, then like that insight should be deemed as the number one. And with that in mind, like what we did was like we came up with this framework of like representing insights. So on the x-axis we said like, okay, like what is the dollar potential for our company? And on the y-axis we had like, okay, like what is the like impact going to be on our customers? And the size of the circle, like we said, like, okay, like it's going to be like how many customers we feel like are going to be impacted, or we like are able to guesstimate like will be impacted. So with this framework, like it was obvious that the things on the top right are the ones like that you should like pursue first. But the other side benefit that we got was like we started like making physical versions of these, and we had like these sticky notes that we used to print and cut down. And then we would just paste like those sticky notes based on our best guess, like somewhere here. And when the stakeholders would come into the room, like they would say like, no, this is not right, and we should move it here. And then it enabled that conversation and discussion that started happening. That okay, like this is where the insights should actually go. So this is a finished version after like we had like several rounds of those conversations. But the top insight that we came out with, like because of which like we created that digital TurboTax tool, was the one that like we felt would have like the maximum impact on the customer and as well as on the company. So this was like a good way of like representing it. So whenever you guys are in situations like where you are not able to like get a consensus on the stakeholders, what we feel is like doing something like text and linear is not going to help. Like it's always better like to visualize it, like like have everybody come into the same room and then talk about like those visual elements, have the modality so that they can do it physically rather than like showing something digitally, because this form is like very pedantic. And as you're seeing here, like Joan and I are presenting this as a presentation, and that's why like it's less engaging. It's more like like we're telling you something, and you're not like engaging as much, like as if you would have like printed like foam core boards and had like put them on different tables and have everyone like huddle around it and like put their notes on it.
And something I just want to comment on this too. This is always a guess. Like you don't really know, and sometimes even until you know what the solution would be. This we usually have a pretty good sense of from our research, but this is where it's helpful to kind of have some conversations sometimes. And what we also find, like you can see how Samesh has then these were the insights then get sometimes grouped into
bigger opportunity
areas. That's also been really helpful for us, because sometimes you have an insights list of like 12 really great top insights, but it's like 12 just seems like too many for a brain to process and pick. And so what we often do like this is kind of once we plot them or whatever, we start to look for themes. And even if sometimes like a recent one we were working on, it was like, wow, there's some insights around the jobs to be done and like what the latent needs of our users are. There were few around, ooh, their journey was really bumpy in certain areas. Like here's the journey areas we can look at, and another one was around sort of just like increasing our visibility. They were more like marketing type things. And so even just having them like, oh, there's 3 clusters versus 12 insights, it just was so much easier for people to digest.
That's a good
and
point.
then pick from there.
Yeah, like I think what we have felt is like if you give anything more than 3 to 5, like people just feel that okay, this is too much. Like I'm not going to remember like any of it.
And then what we can, and I can't remember if you're going to say this or not, but then often when we move into like ideation, we'll still have ideation sessions around each of the, like for example, the 4 things with this number 1, still ideate around each of those areas, but sometimes you find that there's like really great connected ideas because they were part of a larger theme. Yeah.
What's the size of the circle?
So it's like the number of people who we feel are going to be affected if we solve that particular insight.
Like
So
this
you've
is
got,
maybe
like-
more of an edge
So
case,
yeah,
whereas this was like, this was something that was true for everybody.
So this is, it's like how much you care, how
Yeah.
much people care about it and how many people
how many
care
people
about it.
care about it? Yeah, and how many is also like sometimes I guess, but in order to make that real, like if you have like analytics data or like based on your interviews, you can extrapolate a little bit. So combination of all of those things.
We were actually really fortunate on a recent project. We have this one where we talked about what were some of the jobs to be done and what were the latent needs people had. In parallel, a different team within marketing was doing a more quantitative study, and they asked a lot of similar questions. And so we actually got real quantitative data. And what was cool is we were like, that feels right based on what we heard about, but it really backed us up in terms of being able to say, this is what we found, and then now look, we actually also did this study that we can apply, and it helped us kind of resize some things and have some quantitative data to go off of too, which is cool.
And the last technique that we want to talk about is like the wizard boss technique. I think like also called like the man behind the curtain technique. This is a way of testing things that don't actually exist. So hacking them together. And the name comes from I think the children's story by Elif Baum, the powerful Wizard of Oz, and where this person like gave an illusion that he was really powerful, but actually he was he was hiding behind a curtain and like just was pulling levers and controls, to make things appear or disappear in front of the people. IBM like made this technique really popular. So in 1984, they were like coming up with their speech to text software, but they didn't want to invest like countless hours like researching and prototyping and testing the feasibility and all of those things. So what they did instead was like they had people come into a room and they gave them a mic, and then they just had like a monitor in front of them. And what they hid was like that there is also like a person who is listening to whatever that person was saying, and they were like really quickly typing up like what they heard. So they did this experiment and they ran it with like 20 or so people, and most of them gave the feedback that that in social situations, if I'm going to like fire someone, I'm not going to like talk it out loud like where other people are able to hear it. So there were like a lot of those things came out just by doing this experiment, and so IBM ultimately didn't pursue this route, and it saved them like a lot of time and money, because they were able to test these things quickly. So the key question is like, why do you do Wizard of Oz? Like, and from our experience, like there are 2 primary reasons. Like one is like when you show something to people, like a lot of times, they're giving their opinions. They're saying like, yeah, like it looks interesting, I would use it and things like that. But when they actually start using it, like this is an extreme reaction, like this is crowd, but oftentimes it will be like, oh, this is not useful, or this doesn't fit with what I was wanting, and they will end up not using it at all. And the second big reason is like a lot of times when you show something, people are not able to think of all the use cases. But when they actually start using it on a real project, they are able to, tell you in more detail, like what actually is working versus not working with them. So in the TurboTax tool like example, what we did was like we had the paper prototype and we showed this to people. And in the initial versions, what we had was that all the answers to the questions can either be inputted using sliders or some sort of like percentage bars. And we showed that concept to people, and people were very delighted. Oh yeah, like I don't have to input anything. Like this is great. Like I can do approximations. And then we converted those things into wireframes, and we made like everything look more usable and better. And people were really excited to try it on. So what we did was like we created a quick Wizard of Oz where we did just the front end of it. We programmed it quickly, and it didn't have like any back end, or like we didn't build the brains of it. And what was happening was that when people will enter something, it would come as an email to a person sitting in our office, and that person will work on it and send it back to the person who's working with just the front end of it. And so people started using that Wizard of Oz in real projects. And what they said was like these sliders and percentages were actually like not helping them too much. Like they wanted more precision. As a concept, it looked really good, but now that they're using it, they said like we want like actual input boxes to actually enter the details. So it was so much different, and that's like a big thing, because if you catch these things late after you have developed something, then the changing cost like increases exponentially, and also like the time increases exponentially, like in order to revert those. Like another example of it was like we worked a lot on like what are the right questions to ask to people. So we worked with like our target persona, and we narrowed down a list of like questions that they felt like they had answer to. And we put those questions in our Wizard of Oz prototype. And at that time, like they started like telling us more details about like how they actually work, and also like how they see using this tool to work in the future. So they said like what I will actually just answer like the top 5 questions, like where the project is, what the square footage is, and things like that. And then I will actually share this project with my junior or with like a Lutron salesperson to work on it further. And what we learned was like initially like we were talking with them, like they felt like they will do like all the work on their own, and this sharing aspect was totally missed. Only when we did the Wizard of Oz, like this sharing aspect came into being, and we realized that like there are 2 other audiences that we should talk to about the questions, because if they are the ones who are going to end up like answering them, they should be the ones who are able to understand it in the first place. So these are 2 examples, but we have like countless other examples where like we got like more details and more concrete feedback, like once people started using it like on real projects.
Something we're working through now. So this was a software example where, like we're saying, like if we come up with a solution that's software based, our team carries it through, and so we have some more. We have a lot more relationships in terms of being able to even like quick code something, and so what's really exciting now is we have this large innovation project where we started where I was like, okay, we have some things like hardware that we would need a prototype. So this is a new area that we're exploring of how can we do earlier, fast either concept testing or quick prototyping without some of the ideas we came up with would take a lot of R&D to actually execute. So like how do we fill in those gaps? So that's this like new area that we're exploring and trying to find some good resources to do. So that's
no, I like that. Yeah, that's good. To talk about. So so what we have synthesized is like there are like some characteristics of like of doing Wizard of Oz, like and also like it'll be good like if you do like multiple of Wizard of Oz's, like depending on like what are you trying to test, like or what the purpose of the Wizard of Oz is going to be. So the 3 main characteristics are like it should have like a clear intent to begin with, so that like how you want to design your like a fake thing, and like what elements you're going to make look better versus like what elements you're not going to care about. It should be done like with like a minimum time and money spent on it. Because if you're spending like too much time and money on it, it's just better to make a prototype, and you get better results by making a prototype. But then like it's again like it's a trade-off. If you spend too much time and money, then like reverting back to like people don't like it, and you have to revert back. Like then the change cost is like higher. So for this TurboTax like tool that we developed. Like one of the intents was, like we wanted to test, like if the interface is, if a digital interface is enough to get all the project information from these people. And we had like one part-time developer who was using like this AngularJS framework, and we time bounded it to, like the development and the testing should be finished in under a month. And you should always like time bound it. Like if you don't do it, like then, as I said, like it will just like, take how much ever time you give to people.
It's like meetings. They'll fill.
Yeah, like and this even is like on the higher end of like doing a Wizard of Oz. Like what we have heard, like, and Sarah introduced us to this like book in person, and what they were talking about was like a good Wizard of Oz is like if you can do it like under a week, but not by spending more than $200. So we're trying to get there, like, and with the project that we're working with Sarah, like we're trying to see like if we can prototype like the hardwares and like other things like with that constraint in mind. That's all.
So yeah. So yeah, hopefully some of that was either interesting or helpful. It's definitely been we've come a long way. I think now what's been really exciting is we see a lot of the rest of the company getting really into this process with us because they see the positive results coming out of it. And so we have a pretty mature process now, and we're just constantly still trying to keep learning and trying new things because that's how you just keep getting better and better.
And also like our scope has expanded significantly. Like
Right.
earlier we were primarily working on digital, now we work on like services, we work on marketing, we work on like hardware prototyping and all of those things. Our skills are not developed, so that's why we're learning still, like in the hardware prototyping areas. We're very hopeful that we'll get there as well.
So yeah, and if we are actually we are hiring too. So we have two roles, but we're pretty fluid with what people can do between the two. Like we have interaction design and design research. So I personally focus solely just on the design research side, at least as of now. Samesh kind of crosses both of it, but you seem to be more heavy lately on design research.
Exactly.
Then we have other folks who are like purely focused on interaction design or visual design. We do have a few people who then span the spectrum. So if you're interested, we do have the two kind of sheets on what each of those are, but just know that for either one, like if you're interested in both sides,
We have people who
our
are
team's
interested
really
in work
flexible
across
and
like,
fluid.
yeah.
I think also like the work that you do called design research also in other companies would be called like design strategy because you're not
Yeah.
just on the research and insight side, you're on the like, okay, prototype, ideate,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
initial like implementation. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
So if you guys have any questions, not just about the methods that we talked about, like, but in general, like about working in a company, like how, like UX works with other functions and things like that, like feel free to ask us.
Yeah. And I'm just gonna be checking my phone because the Greek
Oh, 'cause
the
the
Greek
Greek
lady
lady's
will be
coming.
delivering soon some food. We got a bunch of different things, so it's supposed to be very good. So I'm just gonna keep this on me.
Smart.
But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts? Like, have you guys had any experience either like on your that you found like similar and maybe like projects you've worked on, or is there anything in particular you feel like you could like try on something that you're working on now? Or?
Yeah, good.
I'd be curious to know how you guys like connect and build relationships with actual users in order to do your research. Because, like in my experience, that's always been the hardest part is actually getting to the customer.
That's a very good question.
Yeah. So, and that's a really we actually almost talked about that as one of our stories, but we didn't have enough time. But so we have so many customers too. So we not only sell to just like an end user homeowner, but we sell like on the commercial side of the business. We have distributors, there's electrical contractors, there's architects, there's interiors. I mean, there's so many players. And even on the residential side, we have professional installers that will go and install our systems for people. So they are our customers too because they buy from us and then sell to the customer. So the easy one to answer is for homeowner research that we've done. So when we want to actually go into the home or do like contextual inquiry kind of stuff, we have developed a good relationship with our data science team. So all of our systems, since they're like IoT systems, people have to have an email to sign up for them and use them. So we've worked really hard between like legal and our data privacy teams to come up with a good process to say like, hey, we want to do research, we want to target these areas. We have a whole process that we can go through to get a list of like people who are okay to reach out to. And then we don't get their names or anything, so the usual intro is, hi there. And then something about what we're trying to reach out about. But then for some some of our B2B customers, we've had to learn this a little bit the hard way. Sometimes what we would do is, like, again, from some kind of like a accounts pay, like a contact database we have for when people actually like purchase from us, we would try to find either like distributors or contractors or whatever through that. But what would happen then is sometimes the salesperson out in the field who calls on them would get really upset with us because they're like, I didn't know you were contacting my customer or whatever. So we've my background actually before I came onto this team, the last thing I was working on was our customer relationship management system that our sales team used. So we were able to kind of like develop some better relationships with the sales teams and talk about like a good process for, hey, like if we want to talk to contractors in your area, or if we want to talk to an architect or a designer, can you help us out? And here's what we're doing. We kind of came up with principles of like, we promise we won't reach out to people too often. Here's what too often means. And now I will say it is sometimes a little slower to get to people, but it does help because if you can leverage that relationship with like a salesperson in the field, they can really help you get in the door to places, a lot of times for free.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do have like ways that we incentivize people to participate, but
Yeah, just to add to that, like, so also like Sarah recently introduced us to a recruiting company, so that has been working really well for us also. So if you want to get someone really fast, they can actually get you to users like within a week. So you pay them some money, they're a little bit expensive, but not as much, but you get like access to really good quality users. Other thing that we have learned now is that like going deep with fewer people is way more like advantageous and like is more insightful than talking to a lot of people, like, but only spending a little bit of time on that. So what we have started doing is like we have started focusing more on doing like observations with a few people, but spending like 2, 3, even 4 hours like with them, like in their offices, in their workplaces, and trying to understand deeply, like like what the entire process is going to be like.
I might need to help you get in.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the interaction between your team and say you need to build a prototype and there's developers that I'm guessing are working on like production apps?
Yeah.
How do you guys interface with them, with the data science team? Do you guys feel like you have to bargain for their time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think like that's a good question. So like initially when we just asked for like help, like it was really hard to get like someone's time dedicated to like something new, like without involving like their manager to manager and all of those things. So it was becoming like really tricky. Now we're trying to like standardize a little bit. Like so we have like we found like 2 things that work really well. Like one is like if you want like someone to work on your team, like on a prototype, then get them excited to work on this thing. Like so share like the background knowledge of the research, like share the personas, share like what jobs you're trying to solve and how it's going to impact the end customer, and then they become your like ally, like in talking to their manager, saying that like I'm really passionate about this thing and I really want to work on this. Other thing that we have started like doing is like we have started doing like some sort of like hackathons within the company. So once we have like the problem really defined well, then what we do is like, okay, like we'll buy food, and like if you guys have like either a Friday or a Thursday, like where we can have like free food and things like that, like after work hours, then like we have like people sign up for it, and then we like do some sort of like a 4-hour, 6-hour hackathon stint, and like we just over the couple of weekends, like we come to something like that we can like develop and test with the people. With hardware prototyping, it has been a little challenging for us so far. So our industrial designers are very heavily involved in the products that they're working in, and to buy their time has been very difficult. So what we're trying to do instead is like we're trying to see like if we can get like outside consultants to like prototype things for us. Like so if we cannot get like enough people from within the company, can we reach out to people from outside the company? And once you have like something built and you get like positive feedback, then it'll be easier to like do a sales pitch to the organization and have like more internal resources dedicated to doing this kind of work.
how do you find, so we're still talking about how to find users?
No, like
Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's okay, you can
Nope.
talk about like
Nope.
finding users.
Just jump right back in. Yep.
like in this school, like what we did usually was like we just send an email to our cohort and like offer like $10, $15, $25 Amazon gift cards to come and talk to us. I don't know like if you guys do it differently, but that's what we did at Michigan.
Maybe a willing participant for $15 on Amazon.
Or buy a coffee or like like. So another thing that we used to do in the school, like and which I think it still works today, is it's good to interview like your close friends or family or things like that. Like even if you do like 1 or 2 rounds of it, like it helps you get the initial kinks out of the entire process, and also like it helps you get a benchmark of like like okay, what are like these people saying, and then how different are like actual like users, like what their responses are. So it's still good to like contact a couple of your friends and like take them through the process.
I'm curious, how long is like the scope of your projects, like the one you presented today about the application for like sales team? Like how long is that, like from start to finish? How long is that?
So a typical project, like it depends on the size of the project, but a typical project like a Neutron, like from starting with the business problem to like finishing it up, like and launching it to people, it's like what I've seen is like it's between 1.5 years to 2 years, and it increases like if it's a hardware, because like then you have to do like very robust testing so that like nobody's hurt, like when they're using the product. If it's a system, then it's even more robust because like like then you have to test like okay, like are things going to work with each other or not. So the one that I showed you, like that was the fastest that we did, like from initial problem to now we are in the launch phase. It took like almost 1.5 years to do that. The very important thing that like underlies that question is like speed is something that we're still striving for. Like we want to do it faster because like it's still 1.5 years, like it's still like way too long, because like by the time you identify a need, like and the space is becoming so much competitive, especially like with like so many other companies and bigger companies coming into the space of IoT, that we want to reduce that time, like once we learn about something that is really interesting to like launching it. So we are getting ideas, like we're even thinking of like creating like a specialized team, like that we can like leverage at any time, like once we have like something that has support of the organization, and then like that team just focuses on that particular problem. We're thinking of other ways like how to speed it up.
Like some ways we've done that so far. So like typically too, like the research phase of the project will only be a couple months, maybe from problem definition, like what's our question that we're trying to answer, to like recruiting users, going out doing all the interviews, synthesizing. That usually doesn't take a super long time. And
which we have reduced, like I think it used to take us
Yeah.
6 months, and then the business people were like, what
Now we're
the
down
hell?
to maybe, like,
6
2
months
or
you're just going
3.
to talk to people, and like there is no value coming out of it. Like so, in order to convince business, you have to show them some value that they can start using. But I think like we have been able to like.
And yeah, and I was gonna say, and some other, like Sumesh mentioned when he was presenting too, like time boxing things is really important, and like giving yourself deadlines. So the project that we've been working on, we came out of it, Sumesh showed you that like XY axis with the bubbles. We picked a problem, and there were a number of things within that area that we wanted to host ideation sessions about, and we had a really hard time getting buy-in. People were like, "Do you want to do 5 ideation sessions? Like we have too much, we don't have enough bandwidth for us to all be in these," and so we were like, "Oh, if we want everybody, it's going to take like a month." But what we did is instead we're like, "Okay, well, you guys can come if you're able," but we recruited other people for ideation, maybe other people within the company who had, for like one thing, for example, we wanted to do it around like aesthetics and like look and feel of our shades. So we're like, who's really into that stuff? Who's into fashion, who's into these things, or who's really into like things being well aligned and stuff like that. And so we recruited them. We had small groups, and we time boxed all of our ideation sessions to 1 week. And we found like different people to participate, and what ended up being really cool. And some of the core team members like that we've been working with still came to some of them, but we got even kind of like wilder ideas since they were people who were super engaged with the project. And then having some of us in there who had been engaged with the project the whole way through brought some of the grounding back, and ultimately then the final ideas were like vetted. But we time boxed it to literally 1 week, and then the following week we reviewed the top ideas. And And then same thing now with, we're like, okay, these are the top ideas. We have 3 things we want to prototype. How can we start to like very early, quick test this? We were actually, our company's very protective of our intellectual property. So we would never be able to like show a concept or even talk about a concept with someone unless it was under non-disclosure.
Like even this presentation went through different, like several rounds of like predicting. I was like, are you guys showing something that like that is not protected yet?
But
It's
anyway,
good.
but we were able to
Yeah.
then say like, okay, well,
Oh, thanks,
thank you so
Sarah.
much.
Smells so good.
Oh, good. But we were able to then quickly say like, okay, well, if we need to file for IP, how do we do that? I mean, we were able to like, work with our legal team from within 1 week. We had meetings to kind of talk about how might we actually engineer this idea, and I think it's getting filed tomorrow or today. No, today's Friday. So we're trying to again like really put these like time boxes on ourselves and like challenge ourselves to do things fast without losing quality.
Yeah, like I think like if you want to be really successful like in any organization that you join, like other than having the key skills that a user experience designer or interaction designer needs to have, like you need to be like really like develop the skills of like being a good psychiatrist, like where like just listening to people, like and trying to assess like what the problems are and things like that. And then you need to be really good at building relationships with like other departments that are not UX, like because a lot of our work is dependent on them, like getting the right people to talk to, being able to like develop things like really quickly. Like I don't think so. Like if you don't do those things, like it'll be really hard on yourself. Like when you're coming up with really good ideas and concepts, but none of them are going to take the fruition stage.
There's some great feedback.
Yeah, we can start having we can continue like having this conversation.
And then